August 1982. In the area between the forest Laguri and Sawa, an old lady was picking up some raspberries. A man suddenly showed up and asked the old lady if she was alone. The old lady replied and said yes. The man immediately took the knife out of his bag and threatened the old lady and took her away from the road by force. The lady immediately undressed herself and said, "Just don't kill me. I do whatever you want." The man started to abuse the lady, and then suddenly, after the abuse, the man hit her in the back with a knife. When the guy stood up, the elderly woman's grips on his garment was so strong that she was also raised. The elderly woman began to shake, pass out, and collapse onto his stomach. The man turned the body the other way and pushed the knife through her chest twice. The man in the story is the infamous serial killer named Johannes Andreas Hanni. Johannes Andreas Hanni was born into a strictly religious family. Hanni's family consisted of 6 children. They have 2 daughters and 4 sons. Johannes Andreas was the oldest of 4 sons. Hanni's parents was extremely religious. They don't smoke, they don't drink alcohol, and don't use any foul language. They wanted Johannes to also become a pastor. They raised children strictly following the Bible. Before meals and before bedtime, they were forced to read prayers on their knees. Every Sunday, they were taken to church service, and for any offense, they were flogged with a rod. Johannes Andreas Hanni later stated that because of the abuse, he hated his parents, especially his father. To further prove that Hannes hated his father, hear his statement in his letter, quote, "My father, beating force overtook me, and the violence to do religious service as well. The further, the more disgusting it became. All my life seemed absurdly hopeless to me. So after another brutal, body full of Christian fatherly love, I wanted to with a knife." Unquote. As Hanni grew older, he struggled with finding his place in the world. He was under the age of 18 when he received his first imprisonment and was transported to a juvenile detention facility. He served his sentence in a juvenile colony in Bilyandi. After being released, he continued to steal and served another 3 years in prison. After his release, he married 23-year-old Bella Tombach, whom he had known since the age of 13. She too came from a Baptist family, and he wrote with her while serving his time in prison. Bella Tombach lives in Tallinn and works as a trolley bus driver. After the wedding, Hanni also moved to Tallinn and got a job as a waiter in a restaurant of the Palace Hotel. As a married guy, he loved to conduct his marital duties while dressed in a woman's nightgown or a bra, and having an affair with both men and women. Hanni's transformation into a serial killer began in the early 1980s. His first victim was a sailor from the island of Saaremaa named Amar Bibo, who was found with 7 stabs. Hanni also took shoes, documents, a wallet, a wristwatch, and a silver ring with the initial EV from the murdered man. In addition, Hanni cut out part of the thigh from the dead body and brought it home. He also told his wife about the crime and said that he wanted to taste the human flesh. Together, they roasted the cut part of the body. His wife later recalled when a psychiatrist asked her if there was anything specific about human flesh, and she said, quote, "A pungent smell emanating from a piece of human flesh during frying, and the pan could not be washed up and had to be thrown away." Unquote. During the murder inquiry, local residents reported that on the night of the incident, Dogs in the private house courtyard barked at a frightening rate. They also located a taxi driver who was driving down Valdiaco Street that night and witnessed an altercation between two individuals. A description of the stolen things was produced based on the victim's relatives' statements. On the evening of May 22, 1982 on Yovi, Hanni climbed into a private house on a street and murdered a 75-year-old man from Belarus named Ivan Sabesky. Ivan received a 4-knife blow struck the left side of his chest. Also, something unexpected. The victim had an incision from the surface of his thigh, as well as his genitalia were removed. Also, Hanni planned to use the old man's genitalia as some kind of dildo. The Department of Internal Affairs investigated the death of the old man. It was later found out that the victim had disputed with his 3 sons-in-law. The authorities suspected one of his sons-in-law, who is an alcoholic and a violent man, who had served a prior conviction as one of the individuals who came under investigation. He was arrested soon after. The suspect's home was searched and the bloody clothing and 4 knives were discovered. The son-in-law said that he was out drinking with friends when his father-in-law was murdered. The authorities verified that he was not responsible for the murder. Initially, the murder of the old man was not associated with a similar murder of Amar Bibo in Tallinn. The third victim is the old lady in the introduction named Evgenia Koltsova, 45-year-old woman who was abused and murdered by Hanni in the forest between Lagri and Sawa. Unfortunately, no one was looking for Evgenia. She was known as an alcoholic. Her body was not discovered until 2 months later, by which this time her body had been badly discarded by wild animals. The identity of the murdered woman was established by a Russian-language newspaper, found at the scene of the crime, which indicate the address of the women, and a handkerchief which was identified by the daughter of the murdered women. Hanni's life took a dark turn. He and his wife were already embroiled in a sinister world of crime. On the night of August 2, 1982, Hanni made a fateful decision to eliminate his wife, fearing she would betray him to the authorities. Fearing betrayal, Hanni struck his sleeping wife twice with a hammer. Miraculously, she regained consciousness, her scream threatening to alert the neighbors. Panic. Hanni bandaged her wounds and rushed her into the hospital. Hanni made a story for the emergency room staff, claiming she has been attacked by a stranger in Glen Park. Despite her horrific ordeals, his wife began to gather evidence against Hanni. Fearing for her life, she kept her blood-stained hammer and bed linen as a proof of his brutality. But Hanni had other plans. He needed to ensure her silence and decided to involve her in another gruesome crime. On the night of December 2, 1982, the couple targeted a taxi driver. They chose the district of Nome in Tallinn as their hunting ground. Hanni handed his wife a knife, which she hid in her purse. They tried to catch a taxi, and after one driver refused, one taxi driver fell as their unsuspecting victim. The taxi driver drove them to a street. His wife exited the car under the pretense of visiting an acquaintance. Hanni, seated in the back, lunged at the driver, stabbing him into the neck. However, the wounds was not fatal. The taxi driver managed to grab the knife and pull it out, fighting for his life. Despite Hanni's demands, his wife hesitated to deliver the final blow. The taxi driver, bleeding profusely, escaped and sought help from nearby resident who called for an ambulance and the police. Meanwhile, his wife drove the taxi away from the scene, abandoning it on a boulevard. The attempted murder of the taxi driver marked the beginning of the end for Johannes Andreas Hanni and his wife. As investigators close in, the couple's grisly crime were uncovered, leading to their eventual capture and the revelation of the string of murders. October 1982, a seemingly ordinary piece of paper and a typewriter revealed an extraordinary confession. The wife of Johannes Andreas Hanni used a typewriter to drop a letter, turning herself and her husband into the head of Talent Criminal Investigation Department. A colleague, intrigued by the document, glanced at it and was alarmed by its contents. The letter detailed 3 murders and 2 attempted murders. The colleague immediately took the letter to the police. The authority acted swiftly. On the October 10th, Andreas Hanni was invited for an interview. Elegantly dressed with a fashionable hairstyle, raven hair, and a dark mustache, Hanni entered the office, then subsequently grabbed by the police officer on his 2 sides when entering. Officer said, quote, "You've been arrested. You will be charged with multiple murders," end quote. The handcuff clicked around his wrist. Before his arrest, the police thoroughly searched Hanni's apartment. They discovered the personal belongings of the murdered victims: 2 knives, a homemade pistol, and a set of lockpicks. All the evidence was laid out on a table in the director's office, confronting Hanni with his crime. Faced with overwhelming evidence, Johannes Andreas Hanni confessed to everything without remorse. His confession was verified through investigative experiments. His testimony painted a picture of a man driven by spontaneous rage. His wife was also arrested and questioned. She testified but denied any involvement in cannibalism, despite the horrific nature of the crimes. On the night of November 6, 1982, Johannes Andreas Hanni hung himself in a cell at the Tallinn Pre-Trial Detention Center. Before his death, he wrote 3 letters, one to the editor-in-chief of a magazine, another to the investigator, and the last one to his wife. After his death, his wife was sentenced to 12 years in prison by the Supreme Court of Estonia. She was released after the collapse of Soviet Union and later moved to Finland. In 2008, she published her memoir titled "I Love Predator," attempting to cast herself as a victim of circumstances which sparked controversy and media attention. And so, the tale of Johannes Andreas Hanni comes to a close. A stark reminder of the darkness that can dwell within the human soul. From his troubled youth to the chilling crimes that mark his infamy,